being able to, when you recognize that you are emotionally overwhelmed, that you're getting stuck into one of these unhelpful patterns, hitting that pause button and saying, hey, we need to take a break because we're not going to be able to say anything productive or hear anything productive if we don't take a pause. And so then taking the time, oh no, did the clicker stop? Maybe, I think the clicker might have stopped working. Oh wait, whoa. It went all the way back to yesterday. We're doing a whole review. Okay, I guess it's working again. So, anyways, taking the time to self-soothe and to take a moment to bring your own body down and then come together and briefly soothe your spouse before jumping back into the conversation. So, we'll get there eventually. This clicker's a little slow. So the next part, okay, once you've done the self-soothing and you're back in the conversation, we're going to talk about how to maintain that connection, even when you're having a conversation that is kind of conflictual in nature. It's a hard conversation. You don't agree or see eye to eye. And I'm going to break this up into two different parts. So we're first going to talk about the speaker, and we're almost there. And then we're going to talk about the listener, because it's important to recognize who is the person bringing up the issue and who's the person listening. Because if you're both trying to bring up the issue at the same time, it's not going to work. Okay, here we go. Because what happens a lot of times during an argument is one person brings up a concern, and then the other person counters with their own concern. And then both people are now trying to talk about what their issue is, and nobody's listening. And that's where the disconnection really often happens. And so with this model, once you've come back, you're both calmed down a bit. It's like, okay, who is the initial person to bring up the concern? That person's going to first be in the speaker role. The other person's going to be in the listener role. And then that can swap. After y'all both kind of work through it, it can swap. You could talk about the other person's concerns, but there really needs to just be one person at a time in the speaker role, or else it's not going to work, and you're still going to walk away feeling very disconnected and unheard because you're both just trying to talk. So, for whoever the speaker is, this is the person who initially brought up the concern. When you are talking through your concern, y'all may have heard some of these before. They're common advices, but they hold true and they're really, really important. No blaming. Blaming just gets you back in that attack cycle that we don't want to get into, or the attack withdrawal. We're not blaming. Remember, your spouse is not your enemy. The pattern is the enemy. We're not blaming, and no you statements. What do I mean by you statements? You always do this. You did that. Okay. Now the other person's just going to feel defensive and attacked, and that doesn't help getting out of this cycle. Instead, talk very specifically about how you feel using I statements. Hey, when this happened earlier, I felt actually really disrespected. I didn't feel good. Or when we got into that argument earlier, I felt unheard. I felt kind of alone in it. Like, I felt as if I wasn't being heard. Sometimes we could still say, I feel like you did X, Y. Okay, now we're slipping back into that. Being really careful, like this is you communicating your emotions, how you felt, without blaming or accusing the other person. It's stating the facts. The fact is, hey, I brought up my concern, and immediately we jumped into attacking each other. Okay, that's stating the facts. But saying, I brought up the concern, and then you didn't care at all about my concern, and you just started attacking. Okay, now you're assuming what the other person's intent was, and you're assuming it was negative. That's not going to get you anywhere. Stay focused on how it affected you, not blaming the other person. And this next point can be challenging because oftentimes when we're upset, what emotion are we feeling? Very much on the surface. Anger. Anger is the one that's very much on the surface. Might be rage, might be just irritation, depending on the level. Anger is what we're usually very aware of. And anger is usually what's very apparent to your spouse. Like, they don't need you to put that into words. That's obvious. But what we do need to put into words, maybe even sometimes for ourselves, is what's underneath that anger. If the anger was taken away, what emotion would be left underneath? Is it hurt? Is it disappointed? Afraid? Unwanted? Embarrassed? There's a whole list of emotions. If you have a hard time identifying your emotions, there are some amazing emotion wheels that you can Google, and they have all the emotions kind of categorized beautifully. I give it out to my clients often, and it's, even for myself, super helpful. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know what I'm feeling. Let me kind of go find and pinpoint what it is. Because when you can communicate that softer emotion, it's one, helpful for you because now you're identifying more of what the core need is. It's helpful for your spouse because they may have had no idea. They just saw you as angry, but they're like, oh, you were actually disappointed. Okay. Now they can better understand your core need and meet your core need because you're communicating that. The softer emotions are also much more likely to promote compassion in each other more naturally, to where now you're feeling for each other because you're like, oh, she felt hurt, not just angry. Anger doesn't usually promote compassion in each other. You get defensive. The softer emotions is where you start more naturally feeling that compassion. And so once you've done that, then express a positive need. And what I mean by that is oftentimes we're very good at saying what we don't want. I hate it when you do that, or I don't want you to do that. That comes naturally, but that's not the most helpful. What's most helpful is when we say what we do need. So instead of, I hate it when you go out in the evenings and we don't eat dinner together, or when you're busy working on your laptop while we're all eating, I hate that. Okay, instead, what I'd really like is for us to eat dinner together tonight without any interruptions. That would give us some time to connect, to talk. I'd really love that. That is so much easier to receive on the part of the other person because it's not attacking. It's communicating what you need and want without attacking the other person. It's so much easier to receive, but it's also more likely that you're going to get your needs met because when you are saying what you don't want, it's up to the other person to guess what you do want. And they may or may not get that right. You're like, I told them what I didn't want. I hate it when you're not here for dinner. So then they show up to dinner, but they bring their whole laptop and phone and they're typing at the table. And they're like, I did what you asked. You said you hate it when I'm not there. I showed up. Why are we still arguing? You know, we tend to be pretty oblivious sometimes. So if we can help each other out by expressing what we actually do want, it goes a long way. I'll pause here because this is a lot of information. Any questions? Anything that's not clear on this? No? Okay. Keep going. So now for the listener. What's interesting is the bullet points for the listener are a lot longer because it is really easy to get sucked out of being a listener and wanting to be the speaker. But the listening role is so crucial in being able to work through conflict in a healthy way that helps breed connection. So first, be aware of the other person's enduring vulnerabilities. Now, what in the world does that mean? So if you know that your spouse has had a really long day, they haven't eaten dinner yet, they're exhausted because they woke up super early, had to sit in traffic for an hour, and they've been having a hard time with their boss. Okay, being aware of all of that does a couple of things. One is helps you take things a little less personally, maybe. If they're like really upset or stressed out, you're like, wait, maybe this has nothing to do about me. Maybe this is they're just kind of in a vulnerable state already themselves. Let me not take it so personally. But also it helps you be able to better attend to what they need in the moment too. Like, okay, they're expressing all of this, but I recognize they haven't had dinner yet. They're really hungry. You know, that's something I can keep in the back of my mind for after we have this conversation, and I can maybe help soothe them in that way. The next point is postpone your own agenda and turn towards your spouse. Usually when an issue is brought up, it's going to bring up something in us too. We're going to feel that defensiveness rise up, or the counterattack of like, that's not what I meant at all. Postpone your own agenda. It's not going to do you any good in that moment to defend yourself. It almost never does any good in that moment to defend yourself. it usually just makes your spouse feel more isolated, more disconnected. Postpone your own agenda and turn towards your spouse and listen. Don't say anything. Listen. And when you're listening, make your goal, I'm jumping down a point, but make your goal to understand your spouse. Because sometimes we'll shut our mouth and listen, but the whole time we're stewing on what we're going to say next. And we're trying to find loopholes in everything they're saying so that we can have a better argument when it's our turn to talk. That's not helpful either. Make understanding your spouse the goal of listening. So when you're listening, don't just postpone your agenda with what you're saying. Postpone your agenda in your mind. I'm sure you're not going to forget what your point was. Postpone your agenda in your mind and really try to understand what is the heart of what my spouse is trying to communicate to me. What are those core underlying needs that are below the surface issues? And that helps when you can tolerate that there's always two valid realities. You might feel one way, your spouse feels completely the other way. And I'm not saying that all truth is truth or all things are truth, but usually there is something valid about what both of you feel and what both of you think. And it can be true that you had absolutely no intention of being disrespectful and your spouse felt disrespected. Those can both be true at the same time. And when you can recognize that, that helps you relax a little and be able to be present, because just because you're listening and you understand what they felt and thought doesn't make yours invalid. They can both be true at the same time. And that's a really big key to being able to work through things, is how can we find that middle ground where there's truth on both sides. And so after taking the time to listen, don't respond defensively. Try to feel the other person's pain so that you can then show empathy. So after they're done talking, communicating, see if you can summarize what they're trying to say. And that might feel a little awkward at first. You're like, why am I just going to parrot back what I heard them say? Like, we were both here for the conversation. But it's helpful because, one, it's a challenge to yourself to really try to hear and demonstrate that you heard their heart. But two, it shows the other person that you were really listening. And sometimes it might be wrong. You might give your summary and they're like, that's not at all what I was trying to say. And you might feel defeated. You're like, I was really trying this time. But what it does is it gives them the chance to clarify. No, like, okay, maybe they weren't communicating clearly, but they now know that that's what you took away and that's not what they were trying to say. They can come back and say, no, actually what I was intending to say was this. Okay, that's helping to clarify and get you both on the same page. But when you're summarizing, make sure to validate their feelings. Even if you don't agree, your intention was not to be disrespectful. Your intention was not to be hurtful. But say, you know what? I can see why my actions hurt you, why it felt that way. What you needed in the moment wasn't for me to try to fix it. What you needed was for me to just be there and listen. Or what you needed in that moment was a hug and not me trying to tell you what you could have done differently. Whatever, like, being able to take ownership for how, you know what, I did hurt you. I can see how it hurt you. It makes sense. What you needed was this instead. That's getting down to the heart and the core of where these arguments usually start in the first place and beyond those surface issues. So that can be a lot to balance as a listener. And this is jumping back to that soothing piece and that break. This is where that's really, really important, because it is virtually impossible to do this when you are both in the height of being emotionally flooded, emotionally overwhelmed, being triggered in that initial moment. It's going to be really, really hard to sit and listen and postpone your own agenda. Taking that time, that 20 minutes or longer if needed, to go pray, to go outside and breathe, to do whatever you need to do, helps you be in the headspace to be able to do this. Any questions on this piece? No? Okay. So, after the conflict, after you've done all of this, you've kind of come to a place of resolve. This this is really nice, the standing together piece. It's not essential. It's not, you don't have to do this. But this is nice because it helps with that repair of like, we're still in this together. We made it. We did this. Like, and so I put some example statements just to kind of give you an idea. You don't have to use these, but you know, I like it when we can stop and turn down the volume of our arguments and conversations. Like that feels really nice. Or it feels good when we can agree that the conversation is out of hand and scaring both of us. And we can pause and then come back and have a healthier conversation. Or, you know what? We were able to notice our pattern and do something different. Like taking a moment almost to celebrate together. Like, this is different. We did it different this time. We still had conflict, but we managed it different and we feel connected. This is great. Or if you're still like, maybe it's ending and it's not fully resolved, you didn't really resolve the issue, saying, you know, even if we're not sure where to go from here, like this is a lot better. We're not yelling at each other. We're not withdrawing from each other. We're staying connected in this process. This is a whole lot better. So taking that moment afterwards to acknowledge what you just did and celebrate together and reiterate that you're on the same team can really help solidify that connection. So this is kind of a blueprint that I want to share with you all. And again, if you want a copy of this, you can ask the Petersons and they can get it to you. But a blueprint for helping maintain that sense of connection during the conflict. And so next, I want to shift a little bit to building connection into everyday life. Because not every moment of our marriage is conflict, at least I hope. We have a lot of really, really great moments that aren't conflict, or maybe a lot of really, really neutral moments where we're just not really doing much of anything. But these are all moments and opportunities to really build connection and create that sense of connection that helps when we enter into conflict. Like if we felt connected all day and then we have conflict, it's a lot easier to work through that versus if we've been feeling disconnected for weeks and we have conflict, it hits different. And so building this helps. So first piece I want to talk through is practice being fond of each other. Fondness comes very naturally when you're first dating, when you're first falling in love, when everything's new and fresh and you're just like, I love him. I love her. They're great. And you're just glowing and raving over all the positive things. But as you get to really know each other and you've spent a lot of time together and life just goes on, that fondness often fades. But being very intentional about practicing fondness is important because fondness is the antidote to contempt. Contempt is something that can often develop in relationships where you just feel disgusted with each other or just really annoyed all the time. And you're just like, ugh, why would they do that? And you start becoming really critical of each other, which is not healthy, not great. But fondness is an antidote to that. So when we're intentionally looking for the positives, intentionally trying to find what your spouse does good, what they're doing well, what you really like about them, it's really an antidote to slipping into that contempt. So some ideas. Express appreciation for specific things your spouse does. Doesn't have to be anything big, doesn't have to be anything huge. It can just be like, hey, like, I really appreciate that you sweep up the floor after dinner every night. Like, that takes a load off my shoulders. I appreciate that. Or, you know what? Thank you so much for working overtime this week. Like, I know it's a lot on you, but I appreciate you taking care of our family. Or it could be something as simple as like, I don't know, like, I really like that you wake up and make eye contact with me every morning or whatever. Like, just finding really small things to express appreciation about. If this is something you really need work on, you could even keep like a log and every day try to like write something down. And then I'm going to communicate that. Being really intentional. Also, spending time, like let's say you're on a date or maybe it's just the end of the day and you're hanging out with each other. Spend time reviewing your history together, the things you've been through, but the positive moments. Because oftentimes, especially if our relationship isn't going so great, we tend to really zero in on all the negative moments. and those build up resentment, build up all these negative feelings. But instead, being very intentional of, you know what are all the positive moments we had? Let's retell those stories together, revisit those memories, look through pictures, building up that sense of fondness in that way. And the last one, it kind of fits with the log piece. But being intentional, even if you're not communicating them, just throughout the day, thinking about qualities you admire in your spouse, and just spend time thinking about those. Because how often do we ruminate on all the things that we're like, I hate that about them. Like, why do they do that? It irritates me. Okay, let's shift that narrative. You know what? What do I really love about this person? And let me ruminate on that and think about that. And that's going to create such a greater sense of connection and fondness. Okay. Practice regularly turning towards each other. This is an antidote to those withdrawal things, where we tend to turn away because turning towards feels so painful, or we have so much conflict that we haven't known how to get through, or whatever. Instead, you know what? We're going to practice turning towards each other and paying attention to each other. So one way that we can do that is noticing ways that your spouse has turned towards you in the past. Like maybe it was you came home and you had just had a really hard conversation with someone on the phone, and your spouse noticed, hey, are you okay? Like, you don't look okay. Are you okay? And gave you a chance to just talk. Like, that's a moment of turning towards that maybe meant a lot to you. Go back and review those and remember those. Another one, though, is be intentional about paying attention to your spouse's bids for attention. Because the reality is, we all need attention. We think that needing attention is a bad thing. When people are like needy for attention, we like talk bad about it. But the reality is we all need attention, especially from our spouse. And we'll do things throughout the day, maybe even subconsciously sometimes, that's kind of like a bid for attention. It could be as much as I walk through here and I bump my elbow and I say, ow. Like maybe I'm not like thinking like, oh, I hope my husband notices that. But like, when he says, hey, babe, are you okay? Like, I'm like, oh, he noticed. Like, he's paying attention. And, or it could be, you know, one of you is kind of in a mood, and instead of just walking by and being oblivious in your own mind, you're like checking in. Hey, are you all right? Or it could be one of you is like on your phone scrolling and you laugh at something, and the other person's like, hey, what's funny? Can I see? Can you share? Like, what you're doing is you're turning towards each other, even in those little small moments, but those build up throughout the day and make a really big difference. And paying attention in those really small things and turning towards each other builds up to the much bigger things. Sometimes we think when we're struggling, we just need this big romantic getaway, take 2 weeks, go to Paris, that's going to fix everything and be really great. The reality is, not really, unless you're doing this work on a day-to-day basis of really learning how to turn towards each other and pay attention to each other's needs. And another big one is taking time, and I think there was a couple last night that talked about kind of how they do this after ministry. But come together at the end of the day, talk about how it went, have those moments to connect, and practice really listening to each other in those moments. Because so often, by the time the end of the day comes, especially if both of you work or if y'all have kids in the picture, like by the time the end of the day comes, you're so exhausted that you're like, I just want to crawl in bed, or I just want to zone out and think about nothing. Like, your brain is done. But every time we do that and we don't come together and talk, we're missing a really vital moment of connection. Now, end of the day is not the time to talk about your arguments, or if your marriage isn't going great, it's not the time to do that. But it is the time to just talk about the mundane stuff, talk about what was funny, talk about maybe what was hard, connect on that level, and it doesn't have to be long. It can be 5-10 minutes. But taking that time at the end of every day gives you something to look forward to, knowing that you're going to have that moment of connection and showing that, again, you're prioritizing each other. Even if we don't have a time for a whole date this week, we're taking those time every single day to connect. If your schedules allow, and if for whatever reason, maybe one of you works overnights, finding a different time of day where you take those few moments to really connect, can make a world of a difference. Now, there are some challenges to this. One of them is, and I know a lot of us are guilty of this, sometimes when we do recognize that we need attention, maybe we don't quite have the words for it, it can come across really negatively. So instead of just asking like, hey, can you pass the butter? Maybe it's like closer to the other person. And instead of asking nicely like that, which is a bid for attention too, you're like, hey, are you going to just hog the butter over there or what? Like, we can like frame it really critically and attackingly. And it's like, okay, that was unnecessary. And so now that could start this whole cycle, one of these patterns that we talked about. Or ideally, you wouldn't ask in that manner in the first place. But let's say you've had a hard day, a long day. We all can fall prey to this. But the spouse notices, wait, this is a trick. This is actually a bid for attention. They're not actually upset that I'm hogging the butter. They're just feeling maybe a little neglected at the moment. Instead of responding defensively and like, you could just ask, like, why are you attacking me? Instead, just being like, yeah, babe, here's the butter. It softens things. It's like, oh, like even though I asked in a negative way, my spouse noticed and saw the core of what I needed and responded gently. It de-escalates things. And usually the first spouse feels bad. They're like, I'm sorry. That was unnecessary. But when we're noticing, even when the bids for attention are wrapped in criticism or negative emotion and you catch it, huge brownie points for that. But let's also try to be aware of when we need attention to be able to communicate it without that. It helps. Other things are, sometimes we really get into problem solving, fix it mode. And so our spouse is giving a bid for attention, and instead of, or maybe it's just feeling some kind of way emotionally, and instead of getting into the listener role, you get into the fix it role and just telling them, you know, if you would have just done this instead, you wouldn't be in this situation. That kills turning towards each other. Now your spouse doesn't feel heard and you don't feel like you're on the same team. So trying to really be aware of like, oh, wait, I'm sorry. I was caught in that fix-it mode. Can we start over and try this again? There's always a repair that can happen. What I also want you to take away from this is you don't have to get it perfect. You both can start the cycle and then be like, wait. Let's start over. Let's try this again. That's been really big. Even in my marriage, it's been really helpful. When we notice ourselves starting, it's almost like we give each other a redo. It's just nice because it's like a way of giving each other the benefit of the doubt of, I know you didn't really mean to come across that way, but you did. Let's do a redo. Let's start over, express it the way that we really need. And that helps with that sense of closeness too. And then the last challenge I want to talk to is when we're distracted by technology or entertainment. This can be a really, really big one. In our culture, we are very entertainment-driven, very technology-driven, and the reality is technology is really stimulating. It stimulates our brains, and we usually don't have to do a lot of thinking. And at the end of the day, or just whenever we want to zone out, it feels really nice. But when your spouse comes up to you and you're distracted and you're like nodding, and acting like you're listening, but you're really not at all, and you missed everything they just said, that's a missed opportunity to turn towards each other. And it can cause a lot of frustrations. And so something that can be really, really helpful is when your spouse comes up to you and you're on technology, close it, flip it over, look up, make eye contact. Making that eye contact allows you to then read them, read what state they're in, what do they need, so that you can have these moments of turning towards each other. And then the last piece that can be really beautiful, and I think this hits on some of the things people shared yesterday that help them feel connected, is create a sense of shared meaning. When you have something in your marriage that is bringing you together, that you can do together and have shared experiences, it doesn't on its own create connection because there still has to be intentionality in all the other areas, but it really breeds the opportunity for connection. So this can be things as simple as, you know what, every night we eat dinner together. That's what we do. We make that a priority. We eat dinner together. Or every night we talk for 5 minutes before we go to bed. Or, you know what, we pray together every morning and we read the Bible for a little bit. Like, these are things that you know that you've already prioritized where you and your spouse are doing something together. Or it doesn't have to be on a daily basis. It could be seasonal of, you know, every year in the fall we go pick apples together as a couple, whatever. It doesn't have to be anything specific, but it's a ritual where you look forward to it. It gives you something to look forward to of, we're going to get to spend this time together, and this is going to be really great. That helps. A second one is having shared goals and a common vision that you're working for together. So for those of us in the church, a lot of times that is ministry or things we're doing in the church together. It could also be, you know what, we're remodeling our home, and this is something we're doing together, and our goal is to get this work done, and we're working together to get it done. If you're parenting, your shared goal is, let's get our kids to bed without any injuries tonight. Like, this is our shared goal. But having things that you talk about together, that you're working on together, doing together, but again, there has to be intentionality where you're not just parallel doing it and never like coming together and supporting each other. It's this connectedness of we're doing those goals together. That can help give a sense of purpose that goes beyond minor conflicts that happen. And then finally, having shared values. This comes up with parenting. It comes up with church and convictions. It comes up with just how you want like health and different things. There can be different values that when couples come together, they're like, oh, we don't see eye to eye on this. Like, this could be really challenging. Finding ways to work through that of like, okay, how can we bring it together to where we have this shared set of core values where we're going in the same direction. And that can't be one person domineering the other person and telling them what values they should have. That's us coming together, having these conversations, using these skills so that we can be on the same page and have these values that we're leading our family with. And when we're doing that, that also leads to a sense of connectedness because we feel like we're on the same team. We're working towards the same goals and values. So that is pretty much all that I have, other than these are the books that I promised you guys that I would give y'all recommendations for. These are the three that I really referenced the most when making this, but I really love all three of these. So the Created for Connection book is from a Christian perspective. It focuses on these patterns that we can get into and creating a sense of connection. It's a really, really, really good book. The Science of Trust, I would recommend that for those who are a little bit more nerdy, who like all the data and facts and studies and all of that kind of stuff. If you're not, you might find it a little boring. But it starts out really heavy with the research, and then it gets into some really practical things. But it really teaches you the importance and value and steps for becoming emotionally attuned to each other. So being able to really pay attention to each other's needs, be present, show up for each other, and in doing so, building that sense of trust. And then the last one, the 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, is a more, I would say it's written more for the lay audience. It still has a little bit of research in there, but it's written by the same author, but it's written a little less scientifically. But it's very practical. It gives practical things, and that's where I pulled a lot of this last stuff from. Very practical things for having a healthy, strong marriage. And so the second 2 are not written from a Christian perspective per se, but the author has a very high view of marriage. He is Jewish, and he very much values marriage, and so it's written from that perspective. So I want to check in. Are there any questions or anything that someone would like clarity on? Yeah. Yeah, so 20 minutes is minimum, I would say. Great question. Because usually biologically, that's how long it takes us when we get emotionally flooded to come back down to a space to where our brain can think rationally again. But 20 minutes may not be everybody's minimum. So some people, biologically, we're all wired differently. Some people, their emotional spectrum looks like this. They're pretty even-tempered. They don't really get huge highs and lows. They stay pretty steady. Some people biologically look like this. So they feel emotions very deeply, very intensely, and it can take a bit longer to come back to baseline. So if you try 20 minutes and you're like, yeah, that does not feel like enough time, that's okay. Like, kind of figure out together what the best time frame is, and that may look a little different depending on how intense the argument got. But 20 minutes, I would say, is the minimum. But again, making sure that you do schedule a time to come back together afterwards. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, great question. And I honestly think that a lot of the same things can be applied. So, sex is one of those surface needs in a sense that everybody has, but it comes back down to those core issues of like, are you hearing me? Do you care about me? Are you paying attention? And so, being able to communicate, kind of using the same script, the same principles, and respecting each other in that process. And two people may have two very different needs or different expectations. That's okay. It can be worked through. It's learning how to pause and listen, put your own agenda aside, hear the other person, and then swap. And you both hear and like, okay, how can we work together to best meet each other's needs? And that could be challenging. Like, let's say if one person has a high libido and one person has really low libido and your needs are very different, it can cause conflict and stress. But even in that, like, okay, well, how can we come together and find a compromise and not, I guess, not expecting the other person to just come in and swoop in and do everything that I want or vice versa, but it's how do we show care and concern for each other in this process? That can actually, even if your needs are completely different, it can create a sense of connectedness even in that because we're working through this together. We're showing each other love, care, and consideration in this process. And we're going to find a middle ground because both realities can be true. We're going to find a middle ground that works for both of us and sort through that. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions? And if not, thank you all for being here. I've really enjoyed interacting with you all, and I know God's going to bless all of your marriages.